Nobody wrote down the final morning. There was no last message scratched into church stone, no desperate ship arriving in Iceland, no European chronicle describing hunger, war, or plague. For almost 500 years, Norse families had lived along the fjords of southern Greenland. They built farms, raised livestock, buried their dead beside stone churches, and sent walrus ivory across the North Atlantic. For centuries, that silence was treated as proof of extinction. The Greenland Norse, people said, had failed. They had clung stubbornly to European farming in an Arctic world they did not understand. They had refused to learn from the Inuit. When the climate cooled and their cattle could no longer survive, the settlers starved inside the ruins of the world they had refused to abandon. It was a perfect collapse story. It was also far too simple. Bones recovered from Greenlandic cemeteries began revealing that the settlers were not the pure Scandinavian population imagined in old history books. Isotope studies showed that their diets changed dramatically through time. Walrus DNA demonstrated that their hunters pushed farther north than many researchers had believed possible. Burial patterns hinted that younger members of the population may have left before the settlements ended. And the more scientists examined the evidence, the less Greenland looked like a civilization that died in place. The mystery was no longer simply what killed them. The deeper question became whether they had vanished at all. At the edge of one southern Greenland fjord stands the ruin of a Norse church. Its walls are broken, the surrounding farms are empty, and nearby graves contain people who lived almost 1,000 years ago. The bones belong to the first generations of settlers who crossed from Iceland and Norway after the colonization associated with Eric the Red around 985 CE. When researchers began examining those remains, they expected a population that looked genetically Scandinavian. The early results complicated that assumption. Many of the settlers carried ancestry linked not only to Norway and Iceland, but also to the British Isles. That pattern was not entirely unexpected. Norse expansion through Scotland, Ireland, the Hebrides, Orkney, and the Isle of Man had already produced communities shaped by intermarriage, slavery, migration, and cultural exchange. People carried from Celtic-speaking regions entered Norse households. Some became spouses. Others became settlers. By the time families sailed toward Iceland and Greenland, the population moving west was already mixed. The so-called Greenland Vikings were not one untouched northern race. They were descendants of a North Atlantic world that had been blending for generations. Large genomic studies of Viking Age burials across Europe later made the same point on a wider scale. Hundreds of ancient genomes showed that Viking identity did not always equal Scandinavian ancestry. Some people buried with Viking weapons or customs were genetically local to the places where they lived. Meanwhile, Scandinavia itself had received ancestry from southern and eastern Europe before and during the Viking Age. The word Viking described an activity, a network, and a cultural identity more than a biological category. Some Vikings were blonde, others had brown or dark hair. Some traced most of their ancestry to Scandinavia. Others carried ancestry connected to the British Isles, the Baltic, southern Europe, or farther east. Norse society absorbed outsiders, adopted them, traded with them, married them, and sometimes forced them into its expanding world. That matters because the people who settled Greenland were never genetically or culturally frozen. From the beginning, adaptation was already part of who they were. The first settlers arrived during a relatively mild period in the North Atlantic, often called the medieval climate anomaly. This did not transform Greenland into a warm country. Winters remained severe, growing seasons were short, and the environment was always dangerous. But reduced sea ice and somewhat milder conditions helped ships cross between Iceland and Greenland. In the sheltered southern fjords, settlers found enough grass to support sheep, goats, cattle, and horses. They established two main regions, the eastern settlement in the south and the smaller western settlement farther north. Despite the names, both were located along Greenland's southwestern coast. The eastern settlement contained the largest farms, churches, and the bishop's seat at Gardar. The western settlement was more isolated and disappeared from the written record earlier. At their height, the Greenland colonies may have supported several thousand people, though exact estimates remain uncertain. These were not towns packed behind walls. They were scattered farming communities connected by boats, paths, churches, family ties, and seasonal work. Households depended on livestock, hay, fishing, hunting, trade, and cooperation. A bad winter could kill animals. A failed hay harvest could threaten an entire farm. Isolation made every ship from Iceland or Norway important. Yet for centuries, the system worked. The Norse raised animals, produced wool, built churches, maintained European law and religion, and remained connected to the wider medieval world. They were not forgotten during their strongest period. They paid church taxes, received bishops and priests, and participated in Atlantic trade. Their most valuable export came from an animal living far to the north. Walrus tusks could be carved into luxury objects, religious art, game pieces, and decorated containers. During periods when elephant ivory became harder or more expensive to obtain, walrus ivory gained importance in European markets. Greenland settlers occupied one of the few places capable of supplying it. This trade connected Arctic hunting grounds with merchants, workshops, churches, and elite buyers thousands of kilometers away. The tusks moved south. Silver, iron, timber, cloth, grain, and other goods moved north. For a long time, scholars imagined Greenlandic hunters operating only near the colonies or along familiar stretches of coast. Genetic and archaeological research on medieval walrus remains changed that picture. DNA from tusks found in European collections could be compared with walrus populations from different Arctic regions. The results indicated changing hunting zones through time and suggested that Norse hunters or their trading partners reached much farther north than once believed. Some journeys may have carried them deep into the high Arctic, possibly toward regions near modern Canada. The people of Greenland were not only fighting the climate, they were losing their place inside a market. At the same time, the North Atlantic environment was becoming harder. Sea ice increased in many regions. Storms and colder conditions could shorten sailing seasons and make routes more dangerous. Glaciers expanded. Growing conditions changed. Farms faced pressure from erosion, shorter summers, and the difficulty of producing enough winter fodder for livestock. The older collapse story says the settlers responded by refusing to change their diet. Their own bones say otherwise. Chemical signatures preserved in human skeletons can show whether a person obtained most protein from land animals or marine food. Early Greenland Norse diets contained more cattle, sheep, goats, and other terrestrial sources. Over time, marine food became increasingly important. By the later centuries of settlement, seals formed a major part of what many people ate. Animal bones found at farms support the same shift. The Greenland Norse adapted. They hunted seals more heavily. They used coastal resources. They adjusted the balance between farming and marine food. They were not blindly pretending they still lived in Norway. That does not mean adaptation solved every problem. Eating seals could help people survive while livestock numbers declined, but it could not restore collapsing trade or guarantee enough food for every household. Hunting required labor, boats, weather, skills, and access to productive locations. A society can adapt intelligently and still reach a point where leaving becomes the best option. This is one of the most important corrections to the old story. Civilizations do not disappear only because their people are foolish. Sometimes people understand the problem and make rational choices, but the choices lead away from the civilization itself. Greenland's Norse identity depended on more than staying alive. It depended on farms, churches, marriage networks, European trade, priests, land ownership, livestock, and regular contact with the North Atlantic world. If enough of those connections weakened, individuals might survive while the settlement system disappeared. This distinction changes how the final centuries look. The Western settlement appears to have been abandoned by the mid-14th century. A Norwegian official reached the area and found no Norse inhabitants, though livestock remained. He described evidence of contact or conflict involving indigenous people, but the surviving account does not reveal exactly what happened. The Eastern settlement continued longer. The last securely dated written record from Norse Greenland describes a wedding held at Falsey Church in 1408. A woman named Sigrid Björnsdotter married Thorstein Olafsson before witnesses. The document survives because the couple later returned to Iceland, where details of the marriage became legally important. That record is haunting because it feels ordinary. There is no panic, no prophecy of collapse, no suggestion that the community was about to disappear. People gathered inside a stone church. A marriage was recognized. Witnesses remembered it. Life continued. Then the document stopped. Archaeology does not show one final massacre. There is no cemetery filled with victims of a single plague. There are no burned settlements proving invasion across the colonies. Farms appear to have been abandoned at different times. Useful objects were often removed, suggesting preparation rather than sudden flight. This is why many researchers increasingly favor gradual emigration. People may have left family by family, ship by ship, season by season. Some returned to Iceland or Norway. Others may have joined North Atlantic communities where their arrival did not produce a dramatic written record. A few households could remain after younger people departed, making the final population older, smaller, and less capable of maintaining farms or producing another generation. Burial patterns have sometimes been interpreted as showing too few young women during the final period. The evidence is not complete enough to build one certain demographic history, but the possibility is powerful. If young women were more likely to leave, marry elsewhere, or be taken away through economic and family networks, the settlement's population would decline even without mass death. A society can end because its future moves away. This may explain why Europe recorded no catastrophe. There may never have been one final event important enough to enter a chronicle. A ship carrying several families to Iceland was not news. A young person choosing to leave an isolated farm was not history. A community shrinking over generations could vanish from documents before anyone recognized the pattern. History records battles more easily than departures. But one possibility has attracted more speculation than any other. Did some Greenland Norse join Inuit communities? The Thule ancestors of modern Greenlandic Inuit expanded eastward, across Arctic North America, and reached Greenland during the later centuries of Norse settlement. The two populations therefore occupied parts of the same island at the same time. They almost certainly knew of each other. Norse objects have been found at Inuit sites, though such items could have been traded, scavenged, or obtained after farms were abandoned. European accounts mention people called skraeling, a term Norse speakers used for indigenous peoples they encountered in North America and Greenland. Some meetings may have involved trade. Others may have involved fear or violence. The scale and intimacy of contact remain uncertain. The uploaded story presents integration with the Inuit as a likely hidden answer. Current evidence does not prove that. Modern Greenlandic Inuit populations do not show a clear, widespread Norse genetic contribution strong enough to demonstrate large-scale absorption of the colonies. That absence matters. It suggests that if Norse individuals joined Inuit communities, the number was probably limited. Their lineages may not have survived, or current genetic sampling has not detected them. It does not justify claiming that thousands of Greenland Norse simply became Inuit. Yet small-scale integration remains possible. Human boundaries are rarely absolute. Individuals trade, marry, adopt, escape, travel, and change communities. One Norse hunter could join an Inuit group without leaving a detectable signature in modern Greenland. One Inuit person could live near a Norse farm without appearing in church records. Cultural contact can occur without producing large genetic effects. The responsible answer is therefore neither certainty nor dismissal. There is evidence of contact. There is not yet proof of major population merger. The claim that Beothuk ancestry appears among modern Icelandic families also requires caution. A rare mitochondrial lineage once raised the possibility of a pre-Columbian Native American woman reaching Iceland, but later analyses showed that the lineage's geographic origin and date remain uncertain. It cannot securely prove that Norse settlers routinely intermarried with the Beothuk, or that Greenland followed the same pattern. This is where mystery can become misinformation. A possibility repeated often enough begins sounding like a discovery. The strongest evidence does not need exaggeration. The Greenland Norse were more genetically diverse than the stereotype. They adapted their diet substantially. They maintained long-distance trade. They traveled far into Arctic waters. They faced cooling conditions, weaker markets, isolation, and demographic pressure. And the settlements appear to have ended mainly through gradual abandonment rather than one catastrophic destruction. Those facts already overturn the old version. DNA helps most clearly with the first part of the mystery, who the settlers were. Their ancestry reflects the mixed North Atlantic world that produced Iceland. The Greenland colony was founded by people carrying Scandinavian and British Isles-related ancestry, shaped by centuries of Norse movement through northern Europe. DNA also helps trace walrus ivory and reconstruct trade. But genetics has not yet proved where every final settler went. That question remains open because the people most likely left in different directions. Some returned east, some may have moved to other Norse communities, some could have died during voyages, some may have stayed until the final farms became impossible. A few may have joined indigenous communities. The population probably did not share one ending. The title says they never left. The more accurate truth may be that they left so gradually that nobody recorded the moment Greenland stopped being Norse. Their genes did not need to remain in modern Greenland for their people to survive elsewhere. A family returning to Iceland would disappear from Greenland's archaeological record while continuing biologically inside Icelandic society. A person settling in Norway would become impossible to identify unless genealogy or ancient DNA connected them to the colony. Most medieval migrants leave no unique genetic label. Greenland Norse ancestry was already similar to populations in Iceland and Norway. A returning Greenlander would not stand out clearly in modern DNA as someone from a vanished colony. The genetic similarity that connected the settlements to Europe also makes their descendants difficult to find there. This may be the greatest detection problem of all. If they returned to the world they had come from, their disappearance would become genetically invisible. The settlements themselves continued changing after the people left. Roofs collapsed, soil covered rooms. Cold conditions preserved cloth, wood, bone, hair, and food remains at some sites. Permafrost protected the evidence for centuries. Now warming temperatures threaten it. Thawing ground exposes organic materials to water, oxygen, microbes, and decay. Sites that once preserved clothing, wooden objects, animal remains, and human DNA can deteriorate rapidly. Coastal erosion destroys buildings before archaeologists reach them. What survived 600 years can disappear within a generation. The climate that may have pressured the colonies is now erasing the record of how they ended. That creates urgency. Every recovered tooth, textile, timber, and animal bone can answer part of the story. Human genomes could reveal family relationships between farms, movement between settlements, changes in diversity, and whether later generations became more isolated. Isotopes could identify people raised outside Greenland. More Inuit genomes from appropriate ancient periods could test whether small-scale mixture occurred, but the research must be conducted carefully. Human remains are not merely samples. They belong to people whose histories connect to modern communities, museums, churches, governments, and ethical questions about excavation and ownership. The next discovery may not produce a dramatic final answer. It may reveal another family leaving. That is the pattern the evidence increasingly suggests. Not one civilization falling in a single night, but households making decisions under pressure. A farmer sees that hay production is worsening. A hunter knows the walrus grounds are farther away. A merchant waits for a ship that does not arrive. A priest serves a shrinking congregation. A young couple considers whether their children have a future on the island. No one believes they are ending Greenlandic Norse history. They are solving their own immediate problem. One household sells livestock and sails east. Another abandons a smaller farm and moves closer to relatives. A third remains for another winter. A fourth never returns from a hunting voyage. Over decades, the social network thins. Fewer people can repair boats, maintain churches, organize hunts, support priests, or help neighboring farms survive. Every departure makes the next departure more likely. Eventually, the last occupied farm may not look like a civilization at all. It may contain only a handful of people surrounded by buildings designed for a community that no longer exists. The ruins create the illusion of sudden disappearance because stone remains after relationships are gone. That is why the final wedding record matters. It shows that ordinary life continued inside a system already moving toward its end. The people at Valsey did not know they were appearing in the last surviving document. They were not performing the closing scene of a historical mystery. They were attending a wedding. The silence after 1408 is not proof that everyone died. It is proof that the connection-producing written records failed. European institutions stopped seeing Greenland. Ships became rare. Church administration weakened. News no longer traveled reliably. The settlers may have remained for decades after Europe's record went silent. Silence can hide survival as easily as death. The Greenland Norse were never who the simple story said they were. They were not racially pure Scandinavians. They were not mindless farmers refusing Arctic food. They were not isolated from global trade. They were not incapable of long-distance exploration. And they did not leave evidence of one dramatic collapse. They were mixed North Atlantic families who built a fragile but durable society in one of the hardest inhabited environments on Earth. They survived there for nearly 5 centuries. That alone should end the idea that they never adapted. What eventually failed was not their intelligence. It was the combination that made a specifically Norse Greenland possible. Reliable shipping, valuable ivory, livestock farming, church connections, enough young families, and a climate that remained barely manageable. When several parts weakened together, people adapted one final time. They moved. Some almost certainly returned east. Others may have followed routes the written record never captured. A small number may have crossed cultural boundaries. The exact balance is unknown. DNA has not revealed that the Greenland Norse secretly remain as one hidden, modern population. It has revealed why searching for one is probably the wrong approach. They were diverse before they arrived. They followed different paths when they left. Their descendants, if they survived, would have been absorbed into several communities rather than preserved as one detectable Greenlandic bloodline. The colony disappeared because its people stopped remaining together. That is transformation, but not in the magical sense. A civilization can transform when its families continue living while its institutions, language, settlements, and identity dissolve. The people do not vanish. The social form connecting them does. The last Greenland Norse may have died in Iceland under another farm's roof, married into a Norwegian family, drowned between coasts, or lived beside Inuit neighbors. None of those endings would leave a sign saying where the civilization went. The churches remained because stone cannot migrate. The people could. That is the answer hidden inside Greenland's silence. The settlers did not all disappear in one catastrophe, and science has not found one secret population carrying their entire legacy. Instead, archaeology, isotope evidence, trade DNA, and burial patterns point towards a slow ending created by climate pressure, economic change, isolation, and emigration. They were not destroyed because they refused to adapt. Their final adaptation was leaving the world they had built. For 600 years, history mistook the empty farms for proof that the people had ceased to exist. The ruins tell a different story when read beside the bones. Society ended. Its people may have continued in directions the record was never designed to follow. That distinction changes the title itself. They never left should not be read as a literal claim that every Greenland Norse person stayed on the island or secretly survived inside one modern community. The stronger meaning is that disappearance and extinction are not the same thing. The settlements ended, but individual lives may have continued elsewhere. A family returning to Iceland would disappear from Greenland while remaining part of the Norse world. A young woman marrying in Norway would no longer appear in the colony's graves. A hunter joining another Arctic community could leave no written trace at all. Each path removes one person from the archaeological story without proving that person died. This is why the final answer may never appear as one spectacular discovery. There may be no hidden mass grave, no lost ship carrying every settler, and no single genetic marker identifying all descendants. The ending may exist only as hundreds of small decisions spread across generations. Scientists can still test parts of that process. More genomes from early and late cemeteries could reveal whether diversity declined before abandonment. Isotopes could identify migrants arriving or leaving. Better sampling of ancient Inuit communities could detect limited contact that modern populations no longer preserve clearly. Walrus DNA can continue mapping the changing reach of hunting expeditions, while environmental records can show exactly when farming and navigation became harder. But even perfect data may not recover every human choice. DNA records ancestry, not motive. A skeleton can reveal diet, birthplace, injury, and biological family, but it cannot tell us whether someone left because of love, fear, opportunity, hunger, faith, or pressure from relatives. That uncertainty should not be mistaken for failure. It is part of the truth. The Greenland Norse were not one body moving through history. They were households with different resources, ambitions, and limits. Their civilization ended unevenly because their lives were never identical. The final mystery, therefore, rests inside an ordinary fact. People move when the world around them no longer supports the future they imagine. The Greenland Norse did what human communities have always done. They adapted, separated, and carried parts of their old world into new ones. The farms became ruins because the people chose life beyond them. That may be less dramatic than a single catastrophe, but it is more human. A civilization can disappear from maps while its people continue in marriages, voyages, households, and memories no chronicler thought important enough to record. Greenland's silence was not empty. It was filled with departures too ordinary to become history and too scattered to leave one final answer. The colony vanished as a name before its people vanished as human beings at all.